Marcus walks into the diner with dirty feet and a handful of worn-out coins. He looks at the menu, his stomach growling and the coins slipping through his fingers. With just enough for a cheap snack, he places the coins on the counter and waits. The cashier, Rachel, watches him in silence, and for a moment the air is heavy. He knows that with those few coins, he won't be able to buy anything. But when she looks at him, something shifts in her eyes. Without hesitation, she takes the coins, smiles, and instead of charging him, she places a hot plate in front of him. "Here, for you," she says, not waiting for a response. The gesture is simple, but in a world where no one cares, this moment of kindness feels impossible. And Marcus, little does he know that this simple act will change everything. If you're moved by this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more moments like this. Marcus entered the diner with hesitant steps, the weight of fatigue and hunger visible on his small shoulders. The glass door creaked open, and he stood there for a moment, absorbing the warmth of the place, the smell of coffee and frying in the air. He was in Chicago on the South Side, an area where many like him were invisible. He was only 10 years old, but life had already demanded more from him than any child should carry. His face, marked with dirt and sorrow, was grim, but his eyes showed a hidden weakness. His clothes were old, shapeless, and his bare feet, shod with street dust, were covered in blisters. He looked at the counter and saw a plate of food being served to a lady. Marcus's stomach growled. He didn't know how long it had been since he had eaten a real meal, not just a piece of old bread or a sour apple he'd found on the street. He felt the coins in his pocket, the few he had managed to gather during the day, and squeezed them tightly as if somehow they could give him hope. They were just a few, not enough for a full meal, but he had no choice. The diner was empty, except for him and a woman behind the counter, the cashier, Rachel, her attentive eyes watching Marcus's entrance. She was a 33-year-old woman, with a tired but welcoming smile, as if life in Chicago wasn't easy, but she still believed in kindness. Rachel recognized Marcus's lost look from a distance. She knew what he wanted, but she couldn't predict what would happen next. Marcus approached the counter with slumped shoulders, quietly, without drawing attention to himself. He placed the few coins on the cold surface of the counter. They were so few they seemed almost nothing, but he tried to hide his shame, looking at the menu as if he intended to choose something that no longer existed for him. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked, her voice soft but firm, as if waiting for the right moment to act. Marcus looked at the coins, then at the menu. He wanted something simple, as cheap as possible, something that wasn't as expensive as the meals he saw being served to other customers. He pointed to the cheapest burger and said softly, "A burger, please." Rachel watched the boy, noticing the way he held the coins with trembling hands. She felt the weight of the situation, but at the same time, something made her hesitate. The diner was almost empty, which meant Rachel had a bit more freedom to make decisions. She knew that, at that moment, Marcus wasn't a typical customer. He was a boy asking for more than just food. He was asking for dignity, a piece of humanity in a world that seemed to have left him behind. Rachel didn't know what motivated her, but she knew she couldn't just let that boy leave without doing something. The cash register made a metallic sound as it was triggered, and Marcus's eyes lit up for a second until Rachel, without hesitation, looked at him and said, "It's on the house." Marcus initially didn't understand. His eyes widened, and he looked at the coins, almost thinking he had done something wrong. "What?" he asked, not knowing how to react. He was so used to being ignored, pushed away, that he didn't know what to do with such an unexpected offer. Rachel smiled, a kind smile that didn't show pity, only sincere kindness. "You don't have to pay. I'll make your order. You can wait over there, okay?" Marcus hesitated. It couldn't be. He looked at the coins in his hand, still trying to understand what was happening. He had already learned that people didn't care, that hunger was a fair price for invisibility. He didn't believe in easy generosity. It wasn't normal, but at that moment, something inside him told him to trust. Maybe it was the way Rachel looked at him, as if she knew what he was going through, as if she knew he had already seen the worst the world could offer. He nodded, without saying a word, and walked to a nearby table, as far as possible from the window where others were watching. Rachel, on the other hand, quickly turned to prepare the order, but something made her stop. She watched Marcus for a moment, seeing him sitting alone, a boy so small in such a big world. He was alone, like so many others who passed through the neighborhood every day. She grabbed the plate, placing the burger with fries on the tray. When she placed it on the counter, the hesitation she had felt earlier disappeared. She didn't know if Marcus would see this as a simple act of generosity, or if he would feel that somehow he was being ignored once again. But before she took the plate to him, she made a choice that would change the course of what happened next. She didn't know at that moment, but the simple act of offering food with no expectations in return would be the catalyst for something that would go beyond her small diner, something that would touch the lives of more people than she imagined. Rachel didn't know, but generosity is never small when it touches a soul that's lost. Marcus sat at the table, his eyes still fixed on the coins resting on the counter, as if he wanted them to turn into something more. He couldn't believe it. It was too simple to be real. Hunger and loneliness surrounded him, and the people around him seemed oblivious to his suffering. But here, in this small corner of the diner, something unexpected was happening. He looked again at the woman behind the counter, Rachel, and wondered what was going on. Meanwhile, Rachel had already placed the plate on the tray and was walking toward Marcus. The burger was perfect, with golden fries on the side, and the smell of hot food seemed to break through the barriers of hunger and sadness he carried. She reached the table, placed the plate in front of him, and once again, without expecting anything in return, smiled and said, "Here it is. Enjoy, little one." Her voice wasn't one of pity, but of someone who simply wanted him to feel seen. Marcus looked at the plate with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. It was a complete hot meal, something he hadn't tasted in weeks, but he didn't know what to do with it. He sat there, his hand still clutching the coins, unable to believe someone had done this for him. It was too simple to be real. He hesitated, looking at the plate, then at Rachel, and finally, with an expression blending shame and curiosity, he asked in a barely audible voice, "Why?" Rachel smiled again, a smile that seemed weighted, as if she knew more than she was saying. She wiped her hands on the napkin and calmly replied, "Because everyone deserves a good moment, even when they don't expect it." She didn't say anything more, just stepped back, leaving him there alone with the plate, as if it were the only gift she could offer, something he never would have imagined receiving. Marcus looked at the burger and didn't know where to start. The smell seemed surreal, like a distant memory from a time when he still believed in good things. He swallowed hard and for the first time in a long time felt a lightness in his heart. He didn't know how long it had been since he'd had something hot to eat, but here, in this small space, he felt the difference. The taste of the burger wasn't just the flavor of the food, but the taste of hope. He took the first bite, slowly savoring it, almost afraid the plate would disappear, like the few good things he'd had. He knew he couldn't afford to be ungrateful, so he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. As he chewed, his gaze drifted for a moment, thinking of his mother, the promises she had made him before she passed, and everything he had lost since then. But for a brief second he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. The fries were crispy, the burger hot and flavorful. The food seemed to have a special taste, as if each bite were a cure for his broken soul. And there, in those small bites, Marcus began to feel a sense of comfort that, no matter how simple, seemed enough to help him breathe stronger, to believe that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as he had imagined. Rachel returned to her post behind the counter, but she watched him from afar, seeing the boy eating slowly as if each bite were a luxury he had never had. She didn't know how long he would stay there, but for now, she was at peace. She knew her simple gesture had made a difference, not just for him but for her as well. How much she in some way needed it. And she was right. Her life, despite the struggles, was still full of moments when she could offer something good to someone. The sound of the doorbell jingling made Marcus look up. A customer entered and the diner returned to its routine. But the atmosphere had changed. For Marcus, that simple act of kindness had illuminated, even if briefly, a dark corner of his life. But he didn't know that this was just the beginning. As he continued eating, Rachel felt her heart tighten, not because she pitied him, but because she understood. She knew what it was like to be lost and hopeless, not knowing where to go. She knew how much a small gesture could mean when the world seemed to ignore you, and maybe that was enough for her. She didn't need anything more. Marcus finished his meal, and though he had loved the taste, he knew the moment would end soon. He didn't want to seem like someone who was asking for too much, so he got up from the table, looking at Rachel with gratitude. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice still trembling, but with the sincerity of someone who finally believed kindness existed. Marcus walked to the door, feeling the weight of the meal in his stomach. The food had been good, but it wasn't just the burger that made him feel different. There was something more, something he couldn't explain. He paused at the door, hesitating for a moment, and looked back at Rachel, who was still behind the counter, her eyes focused on something on her phone. She seemed so simple, so ordinary, but now, in his mind, she was marked as someone important. Before leaving, he glanced one last time at the empty plate on his table. For a moment, he felt good. But as he stepped out of the diner, the weight of reality returned. The street, with its voices and honking horns, was not a welcoming place. It greeted him back with its coldness, merciless as always. He wondered what he would do now. Where would he sleep? How would he get something for the next day? But no matter how much the questions hammered in his head, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a little peace. As Marcus walked down the sidewalk, life around him continued as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything felt different. The taste of the food was still in his mouth, and though the problems hadn't disappeared, he felt that something had started to change. He didn't know what, but he felt that somehow he wasn't alone anymore. Across the street, a man holding a cell phone had been watching the scene unfold in the diner. He had entered the store shortly after Marcus and immediately noticed the interaction between the boy and Rachel. He wasn't a customer, but someone passing by, and seeing the act of kindness, he couldn't help but notice. Something about Rachel's gesture touched something inside him, and without thinking twice, he took out his phone, discreetly filmed the moment, and as soon as he left the diner, posted the video on social media with the caption, "When kindness still exists in a world that forgot it." The video quickly got shared, commented on, and went viral. A few hours later, Rachel's name was being mentioned all over the city. But she, inside the diner, had no idea that her small action was about to explode into a wave of attention she never imagined. Rachel finished her shift a few hours later, tired and unaware of what had happened. The day had been normal for her. She closed the register, wiped down the counter, and grabbed her bag. As she walked out of the diner, she saw a group of young people in front, looking at their phones and chatting excitedly. One of them, noticing her presence, stopped, looked at her and said, "Hey, you're the woman from the diner video, right?" Rachel, surprised, looked at him and asked, not quite understanding, "What video?" The guy laughed and showed her his phone screen. "This one, you did something wonderful for that boy, it's going viral." Rachel, confused, began to see the number of shares and comments. Her first reaction was surprise. It was nothing special, she thought. I just gave a plate of food to a boy. But the comments were flooded with praise, talking about how Rachel's simple gesture had touched people, showing how much a small act of kindness could make a difference, even in such an impersonal world. "It seems like the whole world is seeing this," said a woman passing by and stopping to look. Rachel, stunned, smiled shyly. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but more than the temporary fame she was receiving, what truly moved her was the avalanche of support that arose from that simple moment. People began to share their own stories about how small, but meaningful gestures had changed their lives. The impact was right there, in front of her. But the most surprising was yet to come. When the video reached an impressive number of views, a local journalist contacted Rachel. He wanted to know more about what had happened that day, what had motivated her. Rachel hesitated about doing an interview, but the impact of the gesture was so big that she realized it might be something bigger than she had imagined. "Did you know that this simple act changed the lives of many people, including the boy?" the journalist asked during the interview. Rachel, still unsure of how to respond, looked at him and said with a humble smile, "I just wanted him to know he wasn't alone. No matter how hard life gets, there's always a way to be seen." The video kept going viral and more stories began to emerge. What seemed like a simple meal turned into something much bigger. Marcus, the boy who had received the meal, soon learned about the ripple effect. He was shocked, confused, and at the same time, deeply moved. How could something so simple have generated such an impact? He knew his life was still filled with struggles, but now, he felt there was an invisible network of people who cared, even though he didn't know them. The news about Rachel's act of kindness spread through local media, and eventually nationally. Charity organizations started reaching out to help her expand her reach and offer more support to homeless youth like Marcus. The video's viral spread brought something Rachel never imagined. She became a voice for those who are often ignored by society. Marcus woke up before the sun, as he always did, but that day something felt different. The heat of the early morning wasn't as unbearable as usual, and he stretched, feeling the weight of the makeshift blankets made of newspapers and dirty rags on his body. He woke up every morning with the same thought, where will I get food today? But today seemed quieter, more peaceful, and he felt a little lighter. For a moment he tried to convince himself that life wasn't so hard. He tried. He got up and stretched, hearing his stomach growl. Marcus had an empty stomach, but he was used to it. However, after the meal at the diner the day before, he felt a mix of gratitude and confusion. The warm food was still present in his mind, the taste of the fries and the juicy burger. He had never experienced anything like that on the streets. As a boy who had become accustomed to scraps and leftovers, that plate seemed like an impossible luxury. He walked out from behind an abandoned building where he had spent the night and made his way to the corner. He slinked through the familiar streets, the ones he knew well, where the looks weren't friendly and hunger didn't offer respite. When he passed the park, a police officer glanced at him from a distance, but he was used to that kind of look, the kind that says you don't belong here. Marcus didn't care about it anymore. He knew what the world thought of him. He passed by Big Joe's diner again but didn't go in. He didn't have enough coins and he didn't want to be a nuisance. But as he passed, he felt a knot in his stomach. He didn't know why, but the diner where he had received that unexpected act of kindness lingered in his mind. He felt that something was happening there, something he couldn't understand. The city seemed harsher that day. The noise of the streets, the hurried voices of people, everything felt distant. The streets, which once had been full of life, now seemed like a hopeless scene. Marcus walked aimlessly, his bare feet dragging on the hot asphalt. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of his existence was accumulating. And it was at that moment that he felt it. The gaze. He felt the eyes of the people in the streets, as if something had changed. He didn't know exactly what, but something in the air felt different. Some passed by him without saying anything, but others looked at him more intently. And then he realized. People were starting to notice. He, the street kid, the invisible one, was being seen. As he passed by a store, a woman in the window looked at him with a sad smile. Marcus quickly looked away, confused. He wasn't used to that kind of reaction. Normally, people just looked away, hurrying to avoid any kind of contact. But not today. Her smile, though full of compassion, made him feel uncomfortable. He felt like the streets were now full of eyes, that the world was seeing him, but he didn't know whether it was good or bad. He kept walking, his feet burning on the hot concrete, until he stopped at a square and sat on a bench. He looked around, feeling increasingly strange in that public space, now so full of faces he would never see again. But suddenly, he saw something that made him stand up immediately. What Marcus didn't know was that afternoon, the video about him, the one showing the meal Rachel had offered, was circulating around the city. He had no idea what this meant, but the reactions were starting to grow. Locals began talking about the video, sharing it with each other, discussing the generosity of a woman who had given food to a street kid. Some passed by the streets with sad smiles, talking among themselves. Did you see that video? That boy from the diner? So small, so alone. But Marcus, lost in his own thoughts, didn't know any of this. To him, everything seemed the same. One day after another, the same streets, the same indifferent faces. He got up, leaving the square, with an increasing sense of discomfort. He felt like he couldn't be invisible anymore. Something was changing. He headed toward a less crowded part of the city, where he knew he could rest a little. But with every step, the feeling of being watched grew. He looked at the faces around him, which now seemed more attentive. He felt as if the weight of visibility was now heavier than the invisibility he had been used to. It was strange. He lay down in a quiet corner, away from the hustle and bustle, but still felt that discomfort. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be a story. He just wanted to be a boy, hungry, lost, and looking for somewhere he could feel safe. But he knew it wouldn't be like that anymore. The world wouldn't let him go unnoticed. He was part of a story now, and that terrified him. As evening fell, when the city lights began to turn on, Marcus noticed that people were looking at him again. Some still hurried past, but there were more glances, more sighs. He realized he could no longer hide in the shadows. The world was seeing him, but he didn't know how to handle it. That simple meal given by Rachel had started something he couldn't control anymore. The city now knew who he was. He was no longer the invisible boy, but what did it mean to be seen after all? He still didn't know, and the weight of that answer was starting to suffocate him. Night fell with a tense calmness. Marcus walked through the streets aimlessly, but the weight of the visibility he now carried made him feel as though he was being watched with every step. He was no longer the invisible boy wandering the city corners. Now, he was a story, and somehow that bothered him deeply. As the days passed, Marcus began to notice how much his life had changed in such a short time. No, he wasn't being treated with kindness by everyone, but the glances, the sighs, and the smiles he received from strangers in the streets made him feel strange in his own skin. He didn't know what to do with all of it. One afternoon, as he passed by the same square where a group of young people had looked at him with curiosity, he heard his name. It was a teenager approaching him, smiling, and when calling him, seemed genuinely interested. "Hey Marcus, isn't it you from the diner? I saw the video, are you okay?" Marcus stopped. The teenager seemed friendly, but he didn't know what to do with the attention he was receiving. For a moment, he wanted to ignore him, leave, go back to the invisibility he so longed for. But something in the boy's voice made him hesitate. He felt an impulse to speak, to express himself, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Yeah, it's me," Marcus replied, a bit uncomfortable, but not knowing how to avoid it. The boy smiled, leaning a little closer and said, "Man, I saw that video. I didn't know things were like this. I know the street's tough, but there are people who want to help you. I think it's worth trying. Maybe you can get a place to stay." Marcus for a moment stood still, absorbing those words. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that to him, but it had never been so direct. He thought about everything that had been happening, Rachel's kindness, the video that spread, and how now he seemed to be part of a story bigger than himself. "I don't know, I've tried before," said Marcus, shaking his head. He knew what it meant to trust promises. He had been to shelters before, but always left in the middle of the night. Distrust was rooted in him, and he didn't want to be tricked again. The teenager, sensing his hesitation, handed him a card with the name of a shelter and a phone number. "I know you might be scared, but this one's different. And if you change your mind, there are people who can help you. It won't be easy, but it won't be like what you've been through." Marcus looked at the card, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. He wanted to run, disappear, return to the darkness of the streets where he felt safer. But at the same time, there was something inside him that wanted to believe, that wanted a little more peace, a little more hope. And that night, he did something he hadn't done in a long time, he thought. He thought about Rachel, the simple gesture she had made. He thought about the teenager's words. He thought about what it meant to be seen, not just as a statistic, but as a person. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing ever was. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus thought maybe he could try. Maybe this time, life would be a little kinder. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a different feeling. He grabbed the card the boy had given him and looked at the number. He didn't know if it was the right choice, but he knew that the choice to stay on the street was no longer an option. There was something in the air, a chance he had never given himself. But maybe it was the only chance for change he would ever have. When he arrived at the shelter indicated, a woman at the reception looked at him with a friendly smile, as if the recognition in her gaze were something normal, but for Marcus it was new. He felt that he was being treated with dignity, with respect, and for the first time, it wasn't something he had to ask for. Looking back one last time, he realized that life on the streets was no longer the same. He no longer feared being seen, being noticed. Sometimes visibility is the key to finding an escape. What started with a warm plate of food, offered by Rachel, had turned into something much bigger. Marcus knew he didn't have all the answers and that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was now ready to walk. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he had a chance to write his own story. And perhaps the greatest gift he had received, besides the meal, was the simple fact that someone, somewhere, had seen him. And at that moment, he finally felt like someone who could be more than the label the world had given him. Sometimes a simple gesture can transform everything. What would you do if you had the power to change someone's life with a single act of kindness? If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss more moving stories like this one. Remember, a small gesture can change the world around us. Make a difference. Stay now with another touching story.